the lie you were taught. Imagine this. The year is 793 CE. You're a monk in England, copying scripture by candlelight. Life is quiet, predictable, holy, and then the horizon turns black. Not with storm clouds, but with ships. Long, low ships that sail fast. Dragons' heads carved into the wooden prows as if they're laughing in God's face. And within hours, your monastery is burning, your friends are dead. And the label that history will pin on the people who did it is that of savage raiders. But here's the ugly truth. Most Vikings never raided anything. Most never left Scandinavia. And some of them were more civilized than the people writing about them. Today we're tearing apart the Hollywood image of the Vikings, the horned helmets, the bloodlust, the mindless violence, and replacing it with something way more interesting. Vikings weren't just raiders. Vikings were traders, lawmakers, explorers, farmers, poets, and yes, even menaces. So let's talk about the real Vikings. Let's start with a stat that will probably blow your mind. Historians think that fewer than 10 to 15% of the Scandinavian population during the Viking Age ever went on raids. That's it. The rest of the population were just regular people, living their lives, farming, fishing, working, having arguments with their neighbors about fences and cows just like we do. Viking raids were super dangerous, you know. You could die at sea, die in battle, or even come back home to find your farm taken over by your cousin, since inheritance laws back then were a bit flexible. The majority of Viking men spent their days doing things like tending to their barley and raising their sheep and cows, fixing their boats, rather than using them for raids. The idea that the Vikings were non-stop murderers comes from Christian monks who got robbed, enslaved, or killed during raids. Guess what? They weren't exactly objective. A Christian monk wrote about the Vikings. They came like demons from hell, destroying God's people. Now I can understand the anger, but also not exactly the most reliable source. It's like judging all modern-day tourists based on the worst drunk guy in Ibiza. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Viking trade routes, as of 900 CE, spanned from Baghdad to Constantinople to Greenland to North America. That's no raiding. That's globalization. That's medieval globalization. Archaeologists have unearthed Arabic silver coins in Swedish graves, silk from Asia in Viking tombs, Byzantine jewelry on Norse women. Vikings traded furs, walrus tusks, amber, weapons, and slaves. Let's not forget the slaves. If you lived in a Viking trade town such as Birka in Sweden or Hedeby in modern-day Germany, your life probably looked something like this. You haggled over prices rather than axes. Did you know that the word slave actually comes from the word Slav? Why? Because the Vikings raided so many Slavs the name stuck. Is this dark? Yes. Is this important? Yes. Now before you go, yeah, but they were still barbarians. Remember this. Every single major empire in the world traded slaves, including Christian ones. Viking history is dark, yes, but honest. Here's something Hollywood doesn't tell you. Vikings are actually law and order types. Viking societies had formal law codes, legal councils, and public courts known as things. Let's set the scene. You are in a field in Iceland in the year 930 CE. There are hundreds of people around you. Debates are had in public, verdicts are announced, and laws are recited from memory. This is the Althing, one of the oldest parliaments in the world, still in operation today. No monarch, no palace, no royal law, Viking law. Breaking the law wasn't exactly the death penalty, more like paying a fine, being shamed in public, or being exiled, which was essentially the death penalty with a few extra steps. Women also had more rights in Viking society than anywhere else in medieval Europe. They could own property, they could demand a divorce, they could inherit wealth. In fact, one of the laws in Norse society was, if a husband beats his wife, she can leave him and take her dowry with her. Now that's progressive for the Middle Ages. Another truth bomb. Vikings did not always fight. They were shipbuilders, tellers of tales, blacksmiths, trekkers, explorers charting unmapped lands. Leif Erikson arrived in America around 1000 CE, 500 years before Columbus, and likely thought, good place, too many trees, time to go home. The sagas, their stories of adventure, weren't all blood and gore. They were stories of honor, family rivalries, love, vengeance, fate, Viking soap operas with axes, and these stories are why we know so much about Viking psychology today. So yeah, Vikings raided, but they also built trade empires, created early democratic systems, explored the unknown, helped shape Europe's political future. The image of the Viking as a mindless brute is a lie that was created because the winners wrote the history and the victims wrote the sermons. The real Vikings were complicated, human, contradictory, just like us. If you enjoyed this, like the video, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. Should we do a part 2 on Viking myths Hollywood still gets wrong? Thanks for watching, and remember, history is always darker, stranger, and way more interesting than the movies.